were made as well as we could make you.
Hello lovelies, today we're taking a look at Blade Runner, one of a glut of IP related releases that has come out from a variety of different gaming companies lately. How much longer that model is going to be viable, I guess we'll have to see. But suffice to say, I'm a fan of Blade Runner. I probably own more different versions and copies of Blade Runner as a film than anything else. Even my other favourite films, such as Strange Days, Flash Gordon, Big Trouble in Little China. I think because the world is so rich and full and visually and intellectually stimulating that you crave more detail. I do also like the sequel, visually certainly, in other regards, perhaps not as much as the original. It lacks a certain je ne sais quoi, I think. I also think that some of the commentary as subtext and so on within the original Blade Runner doesn't exist so much within the second one. Yeah, subtext is better than text, but yeah, even so. Alright, let's crack this baby open. So I backed the Walking Dead Kickstarter, which was a bit of a disappointment. You can watch the review on this same channel, partly so I could get a couple of copies of this relatively cheap. Now, it uses their normal system to an extent, but it is somewhat altered, and I think the version of the system present within Blade Runner is superior to the version they have in, for example, Tales from the Loop, Things from the Flood, Forbidden Lands. I think it's Forbidden Lands, yeah, and many of their other games. So it's recognizable, but it's also distinct. Mechanically, I think they had to find a way to differentiate replicants from normal humans, and they found it by using a variety of different dice. So you don't just use d6s. In Blade Runner, you use d4, d6, d8. No, sorry, d6, d8, d10, d12. So it's only a 4 scale instead of a more typical 5, which would run from d4 to d12. Well, which has its issues differentiating between different characters, but I've seen worse. Put it that way. So yeah, Blade Runner means a lot to me. I think Blade Runner has more to do with introducing me to and making me a fan of what we might call the cyberpunk genre, even than Neuromancer or other sort of more proto-cyberpunk novels did. Blade Runner was always transfixing, even when I was too young really to know exactly what was going on when watching it. My dad was always is a big science fiction fan, with a shelf groaning with science fiction novels of various kinds, of a slightly more intellectual bent, perhaps. So maybe that predisposed me to particularly liking Blade Runner. In terms of presentation, I'm yet again pleased to see that they do not use photographic stills from either of the films or the comics or any supporting material. Rather, there is art throughout, which is very evocative of the setting and everything else. The game is very tight. It assumes that you are playing Blade Runners, possibly even replicant Blade Runners, as in 2049. And otherwise, you're all playing LAPD. So it is very tightly focused on a police-oriented investigate, seek and destroy sort of mission. So if you're looking for a broader game than that, just set within the Blade Runner world, this isn't going to be it. Though you probably could expand it with a bit of kit bashing with some of their other games. For example, Alien. Now, there are links between Blade Runner, Soldier with Kurt Russell, and Alien. Mentions of the Tyrell Corporation, mentions of various different weapons or systems, making it seem like it's all on the same sort of timeline, which means you could throw in Aliens. Technically, means Predator is in the same expanded universe, the Ridley Scott-iverse, I suppose. That may be a bit much for some people, but it does open up some possibilities, I think. Of course, the androids in Alien are a bit different to the replicants, but that's explicable. There are set archetypes for characters. I mean, you don't have to stick to them, but in such a tightly focused game, it seems somewhat appropriate. Older characters will be more experienced but less physically capable. They will have more promotion points, and they will have access to more monetary resources, which is abstracted in this. It doesn't really need to come up. Health is fairly constricted and low. Weapons do a set amount of damage with additional damage from additional successes. It's all fairly typical, somewhat predictable in terms of combat, certainly. Somewhat deadly. Unsatisfying, though, I think. And I think that is a problem with a lot of Three Leagues games, particularly using this engine or the variations upon it. Of course, your die type depends on your stat and your skill. D6 is the default. Then you have other capabilities going up. Well, D8 is the default. It counts as average. You're trying to beat 6. If you get over 10, you get double success. So that gives you a range somewhat similar to the big dice pools, but it feels more... Oh, that was a good roll. But it feels more manageable, and it feels more effective than a lot of their other games. Now, you could probably kit bash things, add a 5th level to represent 5th level skills by adding in a D14, which can be a thing, or just doubling up a dice somewhere, perhaps. I'd have to look at the odds more in depth for that, but you could retcon these rules into the other Year Zero engine games, and I think it would be much more effective generally. I wish this was their system all the time, despite the compressed scale and lack of granularity. There are random generators if you want to use them for things like memories, relationships, backgrounds, things like that. You also keep track of stress, which you relieve by taking downtime, shifts off. Time management in the game is done in shifts, so you will investigate certain things. It encourages you to split the party to cover as many bases as possible, but I'm not too sure about encouraging that as a mechanic. So here we have our archetypes. Analysts, city speakers, doxies, like human readers, really, enforcers, fixers, inspectors, someone on the take, and so on. Any of which can also be a replicant. So you can play a replicant Blade Runner, hunting down your fellow replicants. There are a reasonable list of core skills. Again, the tight focus helps here because you're all going to be LAPD. You're going to have some core competencies, but you're not going to stray too far beyond a controllable amount of skills. You also get specialities which kind of dicker with the rules in various ways. You could call them feats or whatever else you want to call them. The inclusion of origami is a nice touch. You can fiddle around to reduce your stress, which is nice. So clearly Gaff was a very, very stressed person. Combat rules, chases, nothing hugely innovative here. It's got some ideas for things, tables for random stuff that might happen in the middle of a chase. You've got critical injury rules, examples of how much stress you might take, which might make for a good sanity mechanic imported into something else. I mean, it's complete, but it's so tightly focused that it doesn't need a lot of big surrounding material to describe other player types, or other kinds of campaigns, I suppose, that you might have within the game. Which doesn't mean you can't do that. You know, you can introduce other elements from other games. It's all, broadly speaking, compatible. We do get a lot of data on Los Angeles, the history of the world, and so on. So this is technically an alternate history form of speculative fiction, because it then, winds forward all the way up to pretty much the sequel film. You get information on all the different areas. It's a broad overview, but in a megalopolis, then there's room for you to make it your own. Even so, I felt I would have liked more expanded information on the rest of the world and a bit more on the off-world colonies. There's an opportunity here to expand on the material if it was ever really thought about to any large extent in the first place. One that I felt was passed up on. Now, perhaps that's just me thinking, as a non-American, I would like to know more about the outside of the world, beyond LA, beyond its environs, beyond America, and you just don't get that, and it feels like a lost opportunity to have cities that you can make your own. So it is very focused on that Blade Runner filmic experience, I suppose, for good or ill. Newspapers, that's a weird anachronism, isn't it? When we think of the future, we don't tend to think of paper newspapers, which is why I think it's useful to think about Blade Runner, certainly the game, as an alternate timeline where we split off sometime in the late 20th century and things changed and became different. We have more information and data on the LAPD, its methodology, how you're supposed to work, resources that you can call upon because you are part of a big organization, corporate resources you can call upon as well because everything's corrupt, underworld contacts and so on. Some of the sort of signature gear that you might remember. And the system's all fairly generic, so the weapons don't necessarily differentiate themselves particularly effectively from one another, but the advantage of that is I guess you can just relatively easily drop in something of your own design, because mechanically it's not going to make that much difference in the game. So this is more of a story focused game. There are augmentations and cybernetics that you can get into, but they're not as prevalent as they might be in more standard cyberpunk fiction. Now, here is another missed opportunity, I think, in the game. In 2049, obviously the digital companion was a big thing. Now, she may not have been a real girl, and the whole love affair thing, it's obviously fake, or rather that's what she was designed to be, but there was enough, at least illusion of intelligence and adaptability and so on. And God, that was timely given the AI girlfriend apps and things that popped up. That I think they should have been a character option. Sure, you can't interact physically, but that gives you an opportunity to create a character that is very tightly focused on intellectual and social pursuits, and can act as like a unit therapist or a good cop interrogator, things like that. And yeah, even if it's not really a true AI, yeah, it just feels like a massively missed opportunity to expand upon the lore, expand upon the world, and give players, a brand shiny new option. It's something I might end up writing up just for my own shits and giggles, I suppose. We see the spinner, designed by Jim Burns, fantastic artist and well worth a follow on social media. Interesting chap. He grows medlars, which is a rather horrible looking fruit, also known as dog's arse fruit. So he's been making things out of his medlars recently. So it's a weird juxtaposition of the future and the past in and of himself. Did you know that Deckard's blaster was originally designed to be a cell phone and then evolved into a gun through the design process? Well, now you know. We see a few more of the iconic vehicles and things that we see in the film. There isn't a huge amount of choice. Most people can't afford vehicles. Vehicles aren't terribly useful in LA, so it would seem. So the sheer fact that you have mobility is very useful for your LAPD characters. The advice on running the game is useful, and again, it's very tightly focused on investigative storylines, you playing the LAPD and so on, and not anything beyond that, which is fair enough to the extent that it is fair enough. But this is a drawback that we see a lot in story games, in that they focus so tightly on the one thing that they miss out on the opportunity to be something more, to be something bigger, to allow you to explore other things within that world if you find it interesting. This isn't really a story game, though it has story game elements, but that focus you may find quite limiting. Now, these are all suggestions of how to do things, but it can read as a little bit more prescriptive, as in this is how you must do it. I think it's useful, it's helpful. Investigative type adventures can be difficult to pull off in a lot of ways. There's very few games that really tackle it. Trail of Cthulhu and its system is probably the premier version of an investigative system. There are a few others that have tried similar beats and ways of tackling it, dead ends and so on. But yeah, not every crime gets solved, and that feels like something that's absent from games that should be present. What if you do fail for one reason or another, or time runs out? And it doesn't feel like you get that much. It doesn't feel like you get that much towards that end. How to cope with player failure, or how to indulge in player failure. As with so many modern games, there's tables and things to inspire you for single player games. If you wanted to play against yourself as a Deckard type character, I still don't see the enjoyment or the fun in that, but hey, you do you. Alright, scores. Style, I cannot fault it on style. It is a little muddy, a little grimy. You can't necessarily make out the details and everything which may be a slightly odd choice given the sheer amount of detail that goes into every shot in the film. But I still can't really fault it in terms of atmospherics and so on. So I will give it a low 5 for style, which is a rare score indeed. In terms of substance, it's tightly focused, which makes it effective at what it does, which is Blade Runner LAPD campaigns. Excuse me. However, if you're looking for something a little more, if you're looking for more information on the world, if you're looking to step beyond the bounds of a police, Blade Runner campaign and just looking to set something in the world, then you're going to be disappointed. But for what there is, it's sufficient and focused and effective on that basis. So in terms of substance then, what is there is good. There's not enough. Split the difference. Call it average because there's enough to play the game. 3 out of 5 for substance. So that's 8 out of 10, 4 out of 5. Recommended. Worth picking up. Maybe wait for a sale. For a Blade Runner fan, everything that's in here you can find somewhere else, but it's nice to have it in a nicely presented, colourful hardback format. I know there are Blade Runner collectors out there, and certainly this should appeal to them, and it's worth getting if you are a collector or you're just into Blade Runner. If you want to go into exhaustive detail, then I do recommend Future Noir by Paul Salmon. This is probably the most complete behind-the-scenes story of Blade Runner, and tells you all kinds of stuff about the film, about the process, everything to do with it. So that's a brilliant resource. It's the Dune encyclopedia for Blade Runner in a lot of ways, though it's more about the film than the world itself. But yeah, this was good, just maybe too tightly focused. Zang.
Let me tell you about my mother.
Bitch. Where's my money? If you want to help me out, you can subscribe to me on Patreon, which is Grimachu, on Subscribestar, which is Grim-Jim, or if you want to make a one-off donation to help support me and keep the channel going, you can do so at paypal.me/JDesborough. Thanks.
Get some plastic surgery against this society. Entropy, apathy, morality, totality. Makeup of your final days. Survival of the fittest haze. Might is right on praise. Smoke and mirrors, twisted maze. Are you strong enough to meet in style? Will you wear your stockings to the trial? Leave the jury in denial. Wear your stockings to the trial. Wear your stockings to the trial.
Chillingly plausible.